The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as the holographic display flickered to life. Ambassador Zyxthan of the Veltari Collective leaned forward, his three eyes narrowing at the impossible image rotating before them. The structure should not exist. Every law of physics that the Council had documented over 40,000 years of spacefaring civilization said it should collapse. Yet there it stood, a massive orbital ring encircling a planet called Earth, built by a species that had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. "This is a mistake," declared High Physicist Korvax, his crystalline body humming with agitation. The material stress calculations alone proved this structure would tear itself apart within moments of completion. The centrifugal forces, the gravitational differentials, the thermal expansion across the day-night boundary. It cannot exist. "And yet it does," said Admiral Chen Wei, the human representative, with a small smile. "We finished construction 3 months ago. It currently houses 40 million people and processes 60% of Earth's orbital traffic." The council members exchanged troubled glances. This was not the first time the humans had presented them with impossible achievements. It was, however, the most dramatic. Zyxthan remembered when humanity had first been discovered. A small, fragile species on an unremarkable planet in an unremarkable system. They had primitive technology, short lifespans, and bodies so poorly designed that they seemed almost like a cruel joke of evolution. They could not see infrared or ultraviolet light. They could not hear subsonic or ultrasonic frequencies. They required constant sleep, regular food intake, and could survive in only the narrowest range of environmental conditions. The Council had welcomed them with polite condescension, as they did all new species. They had given humans access to the standard technological database, expecting it would take them centuries to catch up to even the most basic galactic standards. They had been wrong. Within 20 years, humans had not only matched galactic technology but had begun improving it in ways that made no sense. Their ships were faster than the mathematics said was possible. Their weapons were more powerful than the physics allowed. Their buildings stood taller than the engineering permitted. And always, when questioned about how they did these things, humans would smile and say something like, "We found a workaround," or "We just refused to accept that it was impossible." Korvax pulled up the specifications for the orbital ring on his personal display, his crystalline structure growing darker with frustration. The support pillars alone violate 17 different principles of structural mechanics. They are too thin by a factor of 8. The material you claim to have used, this carbon nanotube composite, should buckle under its own weight at these dimensions. "Should," agreed Admiral Chen, "but it doesn't." "How?" demanded Zyxthan. "We have been building structures in space for 40,000 years. Our engineers are the finest in the galaxy. They have studied every material, every force, every principle. They say what you have built is impossible." Chen paused, considering her words carefully. The truth was complicated. The truth was something humans rarely shared with other species because, frankly, they found it embarrassing. But perhaps it was time. "Ambassador," she said, "may I ask you a question? How do your engineers approach a problem?" Zyxthan tilted his head, uncertain where this was going. "They study the principles involved. They calculate the parameters. They determine what is possible within those parameters. Then they design a solution that fits. And if the solution they need is outside those parameters, then they accept that the problem cannot be solved in that way and seek alternatives." Chen nodded. "That is the fundamental difference between your approach and ours. When human engineers encounter a problem that cannot be solved within known parameters, they do not accept that conclusion. Instead, they ask a different question. They ask, what would have to be true for this to work?" Korvax made a sound that his translation device rendered as scoffing. "That is not science. That is wishful thinking." "Perhaps," said Chen, "but wishful thinking has taken us very far." She gestured, and the holographic display changed to show a timeline of human engineering achievements. The pyramids of Egypt, built with precision that should have been impossible for their time. The Roman aqueducts, carrying water through mountains when the mathematics of fluid dynamics was still millennia from being discovered. Medieval cathedrals that stood for centuries despite violating basic principles of load distribution. The first heavier-than-air flight, achieved by bicycle mechanics who ignored the calculations saying it could not be done. Throughout our history, Chen continued, human engineers have built things that should not work. We did this because we did not know they should not work, or because we knew and did not care, or because we suspected the rules were not as fixed as they appeared. The rules of physics are not suggestions, Korvac said coldly. They are fundamental truths of the universe. Are they? Chen asked. Or are they descriptions of how the universe usually behaves, descriptions that assume certain conditions that may not always apply? This was dangerous territory. The Council's understanding of physics was built on tens of thousands of years of careful observation and rigorous mathematics. To suggest that their fundamental principles might be incomplete was almost heretical. But the orbital ring hung in the display, undeniable in its existence. Zykes then leaned back, processing this conversation. He was old, even by Veltari standards, and he had seen many strange things in his life. He had seen species rise and fall. He had seen technologies that seemed like magic until they were understood. He had seen beliefs held as absolute truth crumble under new evidence. "Tell me," he said slowly, "about the first impossibility your species built." Chen smiled, genuine warmth in her expression. "I suppose that would be the Pyramid of Giza, built over 4,000 years ago by workers with copper tools and wooden rollers. The precision of its construction was within fractions of a degree. The alignment with true north was more accurate than most modern buildings. The internal chambers were designed with acoustic properties that we still do not fully understand." She pulled up images of the ancient structure. Every century since, engineers have tried to explain how it was built. Every century they have come up with theories that mostly work. And every century someone has found a detail that those theories cannot explain. The stones are too heavy. The tools are too primitive. The timeline is too short. "And yet it exists," Zykes then said, echoing her earlier words. "And yet it exists. Just like the Great Wall, just like the Panama Canal, just like the first moon landing, which was accomplished with computers less powerful than what you might find in a child's toy today." Korvac's crystalline structure flickered with what might have been uncertainty. "You are suggesting that your species has some innate ability to violate physics." "No," said Chen. "I am suggesting that your species has spent 40,000 years learning what cannot be done, and we have spent our entire history refusing to believe it." The council chamber fell silent again as the representatives considered this. Somewhere in the back of the room, a minor diplomat from the Krethak's hegemony quietly began reviewing the humans' trade agreements, wondering if perhaps his government had been undervaluing this strange species. Zykes then made his decision. "Tell me more about your orbital ring. Tell me everything. And perhaps, Ambassador Chen, it is time for us to learn from humanity rather than teach them." The words sent a ripple of shock through the chamber. In 40,000 years of galactic civilization, no elder species had ever suggested learning from a younger one. The very idea challenged the fundamental assumption that advancement was linear, that older meant wiser, that time inevitably brought understanding. But the orbital ring hung there, impossible and undeniable, and Zykes then had not survived this long by ignoring evidence that contradicted his beliefs. Chen bowed her head respectfully. "I would be honored to share our knowledge, Ambassador, but I warn you, you may not like what you learn." "Why not?" "Because our greatest engineering secret is not a technique or a material or a formula. It is a mindset, and once you adopt it, You can never go back to seeing the universe the way you did before. Zykes then felt a chill run through his central nervous cluster. For the first time in centuries, he felt something he had almost forgotten. He felt curiosity mixed with fear, the ancient sensation of standing at the edge of the unknown. "Tell me anyway," he said. And so Chen began to explain. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood in her laboratory aboard the research station Prometheus, staring at the results on her display for the 7th time. They still made no sense. They still violated at least 4 fundamental principles of quantum mechanics, and they still matched the physical reality she had created sitting in the containment chamber behind her. The chamber held a sphere of material that could not exist. It was composed of atoms locked into a configuration that standard atomic theory said was unstable. The atoms should have decayed into their component particles within nanoseconds of formation. Instead, they had been stable for 3 weeks, radiating a gentle blue light that came from an energy source no one could identify. Yuki rubbed her eyes and took a sip of cold coffee. She had slept perhaps 10 hours in the last week, driven by equal parts scientific excitement and profound confusion. Her team had nicknamed the sphere the stubborn marble because it refused to do what it was supposed to do. It refused to stop existing. Dr. Tanaka, her assistant Marcus, appeared in the doorway. "The delegation is here." She sighed. She had forgotten about the delegation. Representatives from 6 different galactic species, sent to observe human research methods after the orbital ring had caused such a stir in the council. They were going to ask her questions she could not answer, demand explanations she did not have, and probably go away convinced that humans were either lying or insane. "Send them in," she said. The delegation filed into the laboratory, a colorful collection of alien anatomies that would have seemed like science fiction just a century ago. There was a Veltari with its 3 eyes and flowing robes, a crystalline Corvaxian who moved with musical tinkling sounds, a pair of Krethaks, their insectoid bodies clicking as they examined the equipment, and others Yuki did not immediately recognize. Leading them was a human she did recognize, Ambassador Chen, who gave her a reassuring nod. "Dr. Tanaka, thank you for receiving us. The council representatives are eager to understand human engineering methods at a fundamental level." "I am not sure I understand them myself," Yuki admitted, gesturing at the containment chamber. "But please ask your questions." The Corvaxian moved forward first, its crystalline structure chiming as it studied the sphere. "This material, our sensors indicated, is composed of standard carbon atoms arranged in an impossible lattice structure. How was it created?" Yuki pulled up her research notes on a nearby display. "We started with a theoretical question. We asked, what if atomic stability is not an inherent property, but an emergent behavior based on environmental conditions? The standard model says certain configurations are unstable because the forces involved cannot maintain equilibrium. But equilibrium assumes a static system. What if we created a dynamic system where instability is constantly corrected?" The Corvaxian's harmonics shifted to a lower, skeptical register. "That would require monitoring and adjusting billions of atoms simultaneously, millions of times per second." "Yes," Yuki agreed. "So we built a containment field that does exactly that." "That is impossible. The computational requirements alone would exceed the processing power of every computer in the galaxy combined." Yuki smiled slightly. "We did not use computers. We used quantum resonance patterns. The containment field does not calculate adjustments. It creates a standing wave that naturally guides atoms toward the configuration we want. The atoms essentially balance themselves, like a ball finding the center of a bowl." The Veltari ambassador stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. "You are describing self-organizing systems. We have studied such systems for millennia. They cannot produce stable configurations that violate fundamental atomic forces." "They cannot produce such configurations naturally," Yuki corrected gently. But we are not working with nature. We are working with engineered fields that create artificial conditions. Under those conditions, configurations that are impossible in natural space become not only possible but inevitable. She pulled up a new display showing the mathematical framework her team had developed. It was based on human mathematics, which had evolved differently than galactic standard mathematics in certain key ways. Where galactic mathematicians had focused on describing what existed, human mathematicians had often focused on describing what might exist under hypothetical conditions. This is the key insight, she continued. Your physics describes the universe as it is. Our physics describes the universe as it could be. Both approaches are valid, but they lead to different possibilities. The Krethaks clicked rapidly to each other, their translation devices struggling to keep up. Finally, one spoke. You are saying that impossible things become possible if you change the conditions. This is obvious. What is not obvious is how you determine what conditions to create. Yuki considered the question carefully. It got to the heart of human engineering methodology, a methodology that had never been formally codified, because it seemed so obvious to humans that they rarely thought to explain it. We work backwards, she said. We start with the result we want. Then we ask, what conditions would make this result inevitable? Then we try to create those conditions. If we fail, we ask why we failed and what we would need to overcome those failures. We keep asking questions until we either succeed or genuinely run out of options. And how do you know when you have genuinely run out of options? The Veltari asked. We do not, Yuki admitted. We assume we never have. We assume there is always another approach, another angle, another trick we have not thought of yet. Sometimes we are wrong. Sometimes the thing we want truly is impossible, but we do not assume that until we have exhausted ourselves trying. The crystalline Corvaxian made a sound that the translator rendered as frustrated laughter. This is not science. This is stubbornness elevated to methodology. Yes, said Yuki with no trace of offense. That is exactly what it is. Ambassador Chen stepped forward, seeing an opportunity to build on the moment. Dr. Tanaka, would you be willing to demonstrate your methodology, perhaps on a problem our colleagues consider unsolvable? Yuki hesitated. This was not how science was supposed to work. You did not solve problems on demand with an audience like performing a magic trick. Real research took time, resources, failed attempts, and unexpected breakthroughs. But she also knew that the council needed to see something concrete. They needed to understand that human engineering was not magic or luck or deception. It was a fundamentally different way of thinking about problems. What problem do you suggest? She asked. The Corvaxian stepped forward, its crystals chiming with what might have been anticipation. For 3,000 years, we have tried to create a stable wormhole small enough to fit within a ship, yet large enough to transport meaningful cargo. The physics is well understood. The energies required exceed the output of a medium-sized star. We consider this problem unsolved but theoretically solvable given sufficient energy sources. Can your methodology make it solvable with existing technology? Yuki felt her heart rate increase. This was not a small problem. This was one of the great challenges of galactic engineering, a problem that had defeated the finest minds of dozens of species over thousands of years. She had no idea if human methods could crack it. But she also knew that saying, "I do not know," would undermine everything they were trying to demonstrate. Human engineering was built on the refusal to accept impossibility. To admit defeat before trying would betray that principle. I will need some time, she said, and access to your research on the problem, everything you have tried, everything that has failed, and all of your theoretical frameworks. The Corvaxian's crystals flickered rapidly. That is thousands of years of research, petabytes of data. It would take a lifetime to review. Yuki smiled. Then I had better get started. Over the next 3 months, Prometheus Station became the most unusual research facility in the galaxy. Dr. Tanaka assembled a team of human engineers from dozens of specialties, specialists who worked alongside an increasingly confused delegation of galactic scientists. The humans did things that made no sense. They held brainstorming sessions where the wildest ideas were celebrated rather than dismissed. They built prototypes that their own calculations said would fail, then examined those failures with more enthusiasm than they showed for successes. They asked questions that seemed stupid until, suddenly, they did not. Yuki spent the first month just reading the galactic research. She did not focus on what had been tried. She focused on what had not been tried and why. She made lists of assumptions that every previous researcher had made, assumptions so basic that no one had thought to question them. One assumption appeared everywhere, that a wormhole must connect 2 points in space. This seemed obvious. It was literally the definition of a wormhole, but Yuki wrote it on her list anyway, next to dozens of other obvious assumptions. Another assumption was that the energy requirements scaled with the size of the wormhole. This was mathematically proven by over 1,000 independent studies. Yuki noted it but put a question mark next to it. A third assumption was that wormholes existed in normal spacetime. They warped spacetime, certainly, but they were phenomena of spacetime. Yuki circled this one several times. In the second month, she began questioning these assumptions publicly, in sessions with her team that the galactic scientists found deeply uncomfortable. What if a wormhole does not connect 2 points in space? She asked one morning. Her team pondered this. A young engineer named Lisa spoke up. Then it would just be a hole going nowhere. Or everywhere, suggested Marcus. What if we could create a wormhole that connects to a superposition of destinations, a quantum wormhole that only resolves when you pass through it? The Corvaxian observer made a dismissive sound. That violates causality. You would create paradoxes that would tear apart the fabric of reality. Would it though? Yuki asked. Or is that an assumption based on classical understandings of causality? What if quantum causality works differently? The discussion continued for hours, generating ideas that ranged from brilliant to absurd. Most would prove useless, but buried in the noise were seeds of something revolutionary. The breakthrough came in the third month, not from Yuki herself but from an unlikely source. A maintenance technician named Jorge had been listening to the discussions while repairing a climate control unit. He had no formal physics education, just practical experience keeping machines running. "Excuse me," he said during a particularly heated debate about energy scaling, "but why do you need to punch through spacetime at all?" The scientists turned to look at him, with expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance. "That is what a wormhole is," the Corvaxian explained patiently. "A tunnel through space-time." "Right, but you keep saying that making the tunnel costs energy. So what if you did not make a tunnel? What if you made space-time make the tunnel for you?" There was a moment of silence. "Elaborate," said Yuki, her eyes suddenly intense. Jorge shrugged, seeming embarrassed by the attention. "Well, in my work when I need to move something heavy, I do not push it. I find a way to make it want to move itself. Gravity, momentum, pressure differentials. You use the forces that are already there. So if space-time does not want to form a wormhole, maybe you just need to convince it that it does want to." Yuki stared at him for a long moment. Then she began to laugh. "Dr. Tanaka," Marcus asked uncertainly. "He is right," she said. "He is absolutely right. We have been trying to force space-time to do something it resists, but what if we could create conditions where forming a wormhole becomes the path of least resistance? What if we could make the wormhole the most natural, energetically favorable configuration for local space-time?" The Corvaxian's crystals flickered skeptically. "That would require negative energy densities exceeding anything we can generate." "Would it?" Yuki was already pulling up new calculations. Or does that only apply to forced wormholes? What about a wormhole that spacetime creates willingly? The debate that followed lasted 16 hours and required 3 separate meals to be delivered to the laboratory. By the end, they had the rough outline of a new approach, one that no galactic scientist had ever considered, because it required thinking about spacetime not as a passive medium to be manipulated, but as an active participant to be persuaded. 6 months later, the Prometheus team demonstrated the first stable micro-wormhole created with energy levels that a standard ship could generate. It was tiny, barely large enough to pass a marble through, but it was stable. And it had been created not by overpowering the resistance of spacetime, but by convincing spacetime that the wormhole was a good idea. The Galactic Council watched the demonstration in stunned silence. The Corvaxian high physicist verified the results 7 times before admitting they were real. The implications were staggering. How? Ambassador Zykes then asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How did you do what we could not do in 3,000 years? Yuki, exhausted and triumphant, answered with a tired smile. We asked different questions. We refused to accept your assumptions. And we listened to a maintenance technician who thought about the universe differently than any physicist ever had. But we have maintenance technicians. We have non-scientists who think differently. Do you listen to them? Yuki asked gently. Or do you dismiss their ideas because they do not have the proper credentials? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and pointed. In the years that followed, humanity's reputation in the galaxy shifted dramatically. They were no longer seen as curious newcomers with inexplicable luck. They were recognized as a species with a fundamentally different relationship to impossibility, a species that treated obstacles not as endpoints but as invitations. The first impossible bridge was completed 5 years later, a structure spanning 2 planets in the same system, defying gravity and distance in ways that made galactic engineers weep with frustrated confusion. The humans called it the handshake, and threw a party when it opened. Yuki Tanaka became the most celebrated human engineer in galactic history, not for her technical skills, which were considerable but not exceptional, but for her willingness to ask questions that others had never thought to ask. She spent her later years teaching, passing on the methodology that Jorge, the maintenance technician, had articulated so simply. Do not force the universe to do what you want. Find a way to make it want what you want. The orbital ring around Earth expanded, then spawned sister structures around Mars, Venus, and eventually Jupiter's moons. Each one was impossible by galactic standards. Each one existed anyway. And slowly, one species at a time, the galaxy began to learn something new. They learned that the rules of the universe were not limits but guidelines, that physics described not what must be but what usually was, and that sometimes, if you asked the right questions in the right way, the universe would surprise you with possibilities no one had imagined. The humans had a word for this approach. They called it engineering, but what they really meant was hope, stubbornness, and an absolute refusal to believe that anything was truly impossible. It was, the galaxy would eventually agree, the most dangerous and wonderful thing about them. The year was 2287, 150 years since first contact, and the galaxy had changed in ways that even the most optimistic observers had not predicted. Human engineering methodology had spread through the council species like a slow-burning fire, transforming not just technology, but the fundamental way civilizations thought about problems. But it had not been a smooth transition. The Corvaxian High Science Council had splintered into 3 factions, each with different views on how to integrate human thinking with their ancient traditions. The Veltari Collective had experienced a cultural revolution as younger generations embraced what they called impossible thinking, while their elders warned of abandoning the wisdom of 40,000 years. The Krethax hegemony had initially banned all human engineering texts, then reversed course when a rival power began achieving technological breakthroughs using human methods. Ambassador Chen Wei had retired from active diplomacy but remained an influential advisor. Now in her 80s, she still traveled occasionally, helping to smooth over cultural conflicts that arose as species struggled to adapt. She was on her way to one such conflict when her ship received an unexpected transmission. Ambassador Chen, please respond. This is Station Ultima. We have a situation that requires human expertise. Station Ultima was humanity's farthest outpost, a research facility on the edge of explored space where scientists studied phenomena too dangerous or unpredictable to investigate closer to populated systems. Chen had visited once, years ago, and remembered it as a place where the universe's strangest secrets were poked and prodded by researchers who were either very brave or slightly insane. She changed course and arrived 3 days later to find the station in controlled chaos. Ships from a dozen species crowded the docking bays. Screens displayed readings that flickered and changed constantly. Researchers argued in corridors, their voices tight with a mixture of excitement and fear. Station Director Amara Okonkwo met her at the airlock, her face drawn with exhaustion. Ambassador Chen, thank you for coming. We may have found something unprecedented, or we may have made a terrible mistake. Honestly, we are not sure which. Start from the beginning, Chen said, falling into step beside her. Okonkwo led her through the station while explaining. 3 weeks ago, a survey team had detected an anomaly at the extreme edge of sensor range. The readings made no sense, which on this station was almost normal. But these readings were different. They suggested a structure, something clearly artificial, but with dimensions that violated basic geometry. We sent a probe, Okonkwo continued. The probe sent back images for approximately 17 seconds before all contact was lost. In those 17 seconds, we saw something that should not exist. She pulled up the images on a wall display, and Chen felt her breath catch. The structure was massive, larger than most space stations, but that was not what made it impossible. The structure existed in more than 3 spatial dimensions. It folded through itself in ways that hurt the eye to look at. Parts of it seemed to be in multiple places at once. Other parts seemed to occupy no space at all while still somehow being visible. We have run every analysis we can think of, Okonkwo said. The structure is not holographic, not an optical illusion, not a sensor glitch. It is real, and according to everything we know about physics, including everything humans have discovered in the last century and a half, it cannot exist. Chen studied the images in silence. She had seen impossible structures before, had helped explain human engineering achievements that defied galactic expectations. But those impossibilities had always been comprehensible once you understood the methodology behind them. This was different. This was impossible in a way that suggested something entirely outside human or galactic experience. Who built it? She asked finally. Unknown. The architecture matches no known species. The materials are unidentifiable, and according to our best estimates, the structure is at least 4 billion years old. Chen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's climate control. 4 billion years. That was older than most stars in this region of space, older than the rise and fall of countless civilizations, older than almost anything. You mentioned a situation requiring human expertise, she said. I assume you do not just want me to look at pictures. Okonkwo hesitated, then led her to a secured section of the station where the most sensitive research was conducted. Inside a containment room that bristled with sensors and shielding sat an object about the size of a human fist. It was made of the same impossible material as the structure in the images, folding through itself in the same eye-watering way. The probe managed to retrieve this before we lost contact, Okonkwo explained. Since we brought it aboard, strange things have been happening. Equipment malfunctions, spatial anomalies. Researchers report seeing things that are not there. We have had to evacuate 2 sections of the station. You brought a piece of an unknown, possibly hostile, 4-billion-year-old structure onto your station? Chen asked, her diplomatic training barely containing her incredulity. The alternative was leaving it where someone less responsible might find it. The Krethaks have been surveying this region, so have the Morvathi Syndicate. Neither has the restraint to resist investigating something like this. Chen acknowledged the point with a nod. The Morvathi in particular were notorious for their aggressive approach to alien technology, an approach that had caused several disasters over the centuries. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "We need human thinking. We have analyzed this object with every tool and technique known to galactic science. We have learned nothing useful, but humans have a history of seeing things others miss, of asking questions others do not think to ask. We are hoping that tradition can help us now." Chen stood before the containment field, studying the impossible object. It seemed to shift when she was not looking directly at it, as if it existed more fully in peripheral vision than in direct sight. "Tell me what happens when you try to analyze it," she said. "The results are inconsistent. Each scan produces different data, as if the object is something different every time we look at it." Chen considered this. "Have you tried not analyzing it?" Okonkwo blinked. "I do not understand." "You have been treating this as a scientific problem, trying to measure and quantify and understand. But what if it is not meant to be understood that way? What if it is meant to be experienced?" "That seems dangerously close to mysticism," Okonkwo said carefully. "Perhaps, or perhaps it is a different kind of engineering, one that works on different principles than anything we have encountered." Chen turned to face her. 4 billion years ago, a species built structures that violate our physics. They were clearly capable of things we cannot imagine. Is it so unlikely that they might have had a different relationship with reality than we do? A relationship based not on measurement and control, but on something else entirely. Okonkwo fell silent, processing this perspective. It was not a comfortable thought for a scientist, the suggestion that some things might be beyond scientific analysis. But it was also exactly the kind of thinking that had made human engineering so revolutionary. "What do you suggest?" she asked finally. "I suggest we stop trying to understand this object and start trying to communicate with it." The experiments that followed were unlike anything the station had ever conducted. Instead of sensors and scanners, they used human researchers who were trained in meditation, in art, in music, in all the ways humans had developed to engage with the universe beyond pure rationality. Dr. Sarah Oyelaren was the first to make contact. A specialist in cognitive science with a background in traditional African spirituality, she spent hours simply sitting with the object, not trying to analyze it but trying to feel it. "It is aware," she reported after her 3rd session. "Not intelligent in the way we understand intelligence, but aware. It knows we are here. It is waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" Chen asked. "For us to be ready, for us to grow enough to understand what it is." The implications were staggering. If Oyelaren was right, the object was not just a piece of technology but something more, a message, a test, perhaps even a teacher. The species that built it had left it here 4 billion years ago, knowing that someday someone would find it. They had designed it to be incomprehensible to any civilization that was not ready to understand. Over the following weeks, more researchers engaged with the object using methods that would have been dismissed as unscientific by galactic standards. Artists painted it, capturing aspects that instruments could not detect. Musicians played to it, and some reported that it seemed to respond, its impossible geometry shifting in patterns that almost resembled rhythm. Poets wrote about it, and their words contained insights that pure analysis had missed. Slowly, a picture emerged. The object was indeed a message, left by beings who had achieved a level of development so far beyond current understanding that their technology seemed like magic. They had discovered that the universe was not a static thing governed by fixed laws, but a living, evolving system that could be shaped by consciousness itself. Their engineering had not been about forcing the universe to do things, but about partnering with it, about becoming so aligned with the fundamental nature of reality that impossible things became natural expressions of that alignment. The structure at the edge of space was not a building. It was a monument to what was possible, a demonstration that the limits of physics were just the limits of current understanding. Somewhere, somewhen, beings had transcended those limits entirely and wanted others to know it was possible. They left this for us, Oyalaran explained in a meeting with station leadership and the Galactic delegation. Not for us specifically, but for anyone who reached this point in their development. It is a sign that says, keep going. There is more ahead than you can imagine. The Corvaxian representative chimed skeptically. This is interpretation, not evidence. You have no proof that any of this is correct. No, Chen agreed. But we have something better than proof. We have understanding. The proof will come when we follow where this understanding leads. And where does it lead? Chen smiled the smile of a woman who had spent her life bridging impossible gaps. It leads to the next impossibility, and the one after that. It leads to a universe where the only limits are the ones we choose to accept. The meeting ended without resolution, as such meetings often did. But something had changed. The galactic representatives left with new questions, questions that their traditional methods could not answer. And in asking those questions, they began a journey that their civilizations would continue for millennia. Humanity had given the galaxy many gifts over the past century and a half, technologies and techniques and new ways of thinking. But perhaps the greatest gift was this: the knowledge that impossibility was not an endpoint but an invitation, and that somewhere, 4 billion years ago, someone had already accepted that invitation and traveled beyond it. What waited ahead was unknown, but for the first time in galactic history, that unknown felt less like a threat and more like a promise. And humanity, as always, was eager to explore it. 300 years passed. Generations were born, lived, and died. Civilizations rose and fell. The galaxy was transformed so completely that the beings who had once deemed human achievements impossible would have been utterly lost in the new reality. The first successful fusion of consciousness with the fundamental fabric of space-time was achieved not by humans, but by a collaboration between 17 species, using principles that humans had first suggested and that the ancient monument had confirmed were possible. Beings could now exist in multiple places simultaneously, could experience time nonlinearly, could touch the edges of dimensions that had once been purely theoretical. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was long dead, but her legacy lived on in the Tanaka Institute for Impossible Engineering, an organization that had grown from a single laboratory to a galaxy-spanning network of researchers dedicated to pushing beyond known limits. Her saying had become a proverb. The universe does not tell us what is possible. We tell the universe. Marcus Chen Oyalaran, great-great-grandson of the legendary Ambassador Chen and the consciousness researcher Sarah Oyalaran, stood at the edge of what was about to be either humanity's greatest achievement or its final mistake. Around him, representatives of every major species in the galaxy watched in tense silence. Before them stood a gate. It was not a wormhole or a transit system or any other technology the galaxy had developed. It was something entirely new, a direct application of principles learned from the ancient monument, a doorway to somewhere else entirely. The calculations are complete, announced the chief engineer, a Corvaxian whose crystal structure had been modified to incorporate human neural patterns. The gate is stable. We can proceed when ready. Marcus looked at the assembled representatives. 3 centuries of cooperation had brought them here. 3 centuries of species learning from each other, challenging each other, refusing to accept that any barrier was truly insurmountable. The gate was not a human achievement. It was a galactic achievement, proof that the impossible thinking humans had introduced could thrive in minds of any origin. "Where does it lead?" asked the Veltari delegate, her great-great-great-granddaughter's eyes shining with the same curiosity that had driven her ancestor to first invite humans to teach. "We do not know," Marcus admitted. "The gate does not lead to a specific location. It leads to a different state of reality entirely. The mathematics suggest that on the other side, the rules we have learned, even the impossible rules we have discovered, will not apply. It will be like nothing any of us have ever experienced." "Then why go?" asked the young Krethex engineer. "Why risk everything on the unknown?" Marcus smiled, an expression that carried echoes of generations of explorers and dreamers. "Because that is what we do. We ask what lies beyond. We refuse to accept that there is anywhere we cannot go, anything we cannot understand, any limit we cannot transcend. That is what humans brought to the galaxy, and it is what the galaxy has made its own." He turned to face the gate, its surface shimmering with energies that existed outside normal space-time. The beings who built the monument did this. They stepped into the unknown and became something we can barely comprehend. They left signs so that others could follow. Now it is our turn. The chamber fell silent. Everyone present understood the weight of this moment. They were standing at the edge of everything they knew, about to take a step into something entirely new. "I will go first," Marcus said. "I am the youngest descendant of both lineages that started this journey, Chen and Oyalaran. It seems fitting." No one argued. Some part of them had known it would be this way. Marcus walked toward the gate, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. He thought about his great-great-grandmother, who had first helped the galaxy understand that humans were not lucky but determined. He thought about Sarah Oyalaran, who had first touched the consciousness within the ancient artifact. He thought about all the impossible things that had been achieved because someone had refused to believe they were impossible. At the threshold of the gate he paused. "Whatever happens," he said without turning around, "keep going, keep asking questions, keep refusing to accept limits. That is the only way forward." Then he stepped through. The representatives waited in tense silence. Seconds passed, then minutes. Some began to fear the worst. Then the gate flickered, and Marcus stepped back through. But he was changed. His body remained the same, but something in his eyes was different, something that spoke of sights no one in the galaxy had ever seen. "What did you find?" the Corvaxian engineer asked, their crystals chiming with urgency. Marcus took a long moment before answering. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that had not been there before. "I found the builders of the monument. They are still there, or rather everywhere, or perhaps they are the everywhere. They have transcended so completely that our concepts of existence do not apply to them anymore." He paused, struggling to translate experiences that exceeded language. "They welcomed me. They showed me what they have become, what they did to get there, and what waits for any species willing to make the journey." "Can you share what you learned?" the Veltari asked. "Some of it, the parts that our minds can hold." Marcus looked at each representative in turn. "But the most important thing they told me was not about them. It was about us." "What did they say?" Marcus smiled, an expression that carried both joy and a profound sadness. "They said they had been waiting. For 4 billion years they had been waiting for someone to find the monument, to understand it, and to take the next step. They said many species had reached the monument before, but none had been ready. None had the right mindset." "And we do?" asked the Krethax engineer skeptically. "Yes, because of the humans." Marcus's smile widened. "They said that in all the billions of years they have watched, they had never seen a species quite like humans. A species so stubborn, so unwilling to accept limits, so certain that impossibility was just a challenge to overcome. They said humans were the key that could unlock the rest of the galaxy's potential. He looked at the assembled representatives, beings from dozens of species who had learned to think in impossible ways. And they were right. Humans did not just bring new technology, they brought a new way of being, and that way of being spread until the whole galaxy was ready for this moment. The chamber erupted in murmurs and discussions. Some were skeptical, some were awed, some were frightened by the implications of what they had heard. But through it all, one truth remained clear. Humanity's greatest engineering achievement had not been the orbital ring, or the impossible bridge, or any of the physical structures that had amazed the galaxy. Their greatest achievement had been far simpler and far more profound. They had taught the universe to believe in itself. In the years that followed, species after species stepped through the gate and began the transformation the monument builders had undergone so long ago. The galaxy emptied slowly as civilizations transcended their physical forms and joined something larger. It was not death. It was the ultimate evolution, the final impossible achievement. And at the heart of it all, woven into the very fabric of the new existence, was a simple lesson that humans had first articulated, and that the galaxy had made its own. Nothing is impossible to those who refuse to believe in impossibility. The universe, it turned out, had been waiting for someone to say that, and once the words were spoken, everything changed. Everything became possible.